The Psychology of Scarcity, Lack, and Poverty. Chapter 5, The Emotional Landscape of Poverty. The experience of scarcity is not merely cognitive but profoundly emotional. A constellation of distinct emotional states characterizes the subjective experience of lack, creating patterns of feeling that both reflect and reinforce scarcity consciousness. Fear and anxiety form the emotional bedrock of scarcity consciousness. This isn't the acute fear response triggered by immediate danger, but a chronic, low-grade vigilance, a persistent sense that disaster lurks just beyond the horizon. This anticipatory anxiety manifests physically as muscle tension, disturbed sleep, digestive issues, and heightened startle response, creating a body state that constantly signals threat even in objectively secure circumstances. This ambient fear creates a paradoxical relationship with security. The scarcity-conditioned mind simultaneously craves safety and mistrusts it, often feeling most uncomfortable precisely when things are going well. As one client described it, when everything's falling apart, at least I know where I stand. It's when things are good that I get terrified, waiting for the other shoe to drop. This emotional pattern explains why many people unconsciously sabotage success or stability. The unfamiliar emotional territory of sufficiency can feel more threatening than the familiar pain of lack. Closely related to fear is the comparative emotion of envy. While often judged as a moral failing, envy serves an evolutionary function, alerting us to resource disparities that might affect survival. In scarcity consciousness, however, this natural comparison becomes pathological. Every encounter with another's abundance triggers not just desire for similar resources but a painful awareness of one's own perceived inadequacy. Importantly, the emotional experience of not enough operates independently of objective circumstances. Research consistently finds weak correlation between actual wealth and subjective well-being beyond meeting basic needs. Some individuals with modest resources experience emotional sufficiency, while others with objectively abundant resources live in a persistent emotional state of deprivation. This emotional poverty, the felt sense that one's internal resources, time, energy, or capacity are chronically insufficient, often proves more debilitating than material lack. Perhaps the most debilitating emotional component of scarcity consciousness is learned helplessness, the pervasive sense that one's actions cannot meaningfully affect outcomes. First identified in laboratory animals subjected to inescapable shocks, this psychological phenomenon manifests in humans who have repeatedly experienced inability to control important outcomes. This state creates profound demotivation. Why attempt change when past efforts have proven futile? These emotional patterns create self-reinforcing cycles. Chronic anxiety depletes energy that might otherwise be directed toward creative problem-solving. Envy and comparison foster isolation precisely when connection might provide resources and opportunities. And learned helplessness prevents the very action that might disrupt scarcity patterns. Yet understanding this emotional landscape creates possibilities for transformation. By recognizing these emotional states as natural adaptations to perceived scarcity rather than personal failings, we can approach them with curiosity rather than judgment. This awareness allows us to work directly with the emotional body, using practices that regulate the nervous system, process accumulated emotional residue, and gradually establish the internal security that forms the emotional foundation of abundance consciousness. Chapter 6, Psychological Poverty Traps. Beyond specific emotions and thought patterns, scarcity consciousness creates complex psychological structures that actively maintain perceived lack even in the face of contrary evidence or opportunity. These poverty traps operate largely below conscious awareness, creating persistent patterns that resist change through willpower alone. Imposter syndrome represents one of the most common manifestations of these structures. This phenomenon, where individuals feel fraudulent despite objective evidence of competence or success, affects an estimated 70% of adults at some point in their lives. While often discussed as a confidence issue, imposter syndrome frequently stems from deeper scarcity beliefs about inherent worthiness. When a person fundamentally believes they are not enough, any success or recognition creates cognitive dissonance that the mind resolves either by dismissing the achievement, "I just got lucky," or by living in fear of eventual exposure. This dynamic creates a psychological double bind. Achievements fail to update the core belief in insufficiency, while each new success increases anxiety about maintaining the facade. This explains why many accomplished individuals continue to feel chronically inadequate despite accumulating evidence of their capabilities. The underlying scarcity belief, "I am not enough," simply finds new expressions regardless of external validation. Related to imposter syndrome is the pervasive pattern of unconscious self-sabotage. When core identity is organized around scarcity, experiences of abundance can trigger profound psychological threat. The mind perceives a dangerous inconsistency between experience, abundance, and identity, scarcity, creating internal pressure to resolve this dissonance. Since human psychology prioritizes identity coherence over almost everything else, the result is often unconscious behavior that returns the person to familiar scarcity. Whether through financial decisions that undermine wealth building, relationship patterns that recreate emotional deprivation, or career choices that limit prosperity. Time scarcity represents another manifestation of these psychological traps. When the scarcity-conditioned mind perceives insufficient time, it adopts the same tunneling response seen with material scarcity, focusing intensely on immediate demands while losing perspective on priorities and possibilities. This creates the paradoxical experience where the harder one works to catch up, the further behind one feels. Importantly, time scarcity often masks deeper forms of perceived insufficiency. The person who doesn't have time for rest, creative pursuits, or relationships may actually be expressing unconscious beliefs about not deserving these experiences, or protecting themselves from the vulnerability of open time where underlying emotional material might surface. The chronically busy schedule becomes both symptom of and defense against deeper scarcity beliefs. Perhaps the most subtle poverty trap lies in conditional receiving, the belief that abundance must be earned through suffering, struggle, or exceptional performance. This belief creates a transactional relationship with prosperity, where one must continually prove worthiness through effortful striving. While effort certainly plays a role in creating certain forms of abundance, this psychological pattern goes further, making receptivity itself conditional on demonstration of merit. This conditional receiving manifests in difficulty accepting gifts, help, or opportunities that come easily, discomfort with unstructured time or unearned pleasure, and the subtle expectation that good fortune must eventually be paid for through equivalent hardship. At its core lies a profound discomfort with the concept of grace. Abundance received not through transactional exchange but through the inherent generosity of life itself. Recognition of these psychological poverty traps allows us to approach transformation more strategically. Rather than simply trying to override these patterns through positive thinking or affirmation, effective change requires addressing the underlying structures themselves, a process that involves both conscious awareness and subconscious reprogramming through consistent practice and, often, skilled support. Part 3: Systemic Scarcity Beyond the Individual. Chapter 7: Capitalism, Inequality, and the Scarcity Economy. While our exploration thus far has focused primarily on internal dimensions of scarcity consciousness, we must now consider how economic systems themselves create and maintain conditions of both actual and perceived scarcity. Far from neutral frameworks for resource exchange, economic structures actively shape psychological relationships with abundance and limitation. Modern capitalism operates on a fundamental paradox. While ostensibly promising abundance through growth and innovation, it simultaneously relies on perceived scarcity to drive consumption and production. Marketing systems manufacture artificial scarcity through engineered obsolescence, status competition, and the continuous creation of new needs. Meanwhile, the pressure to maintain economic growth requires the constant stimulation of desire, creating what sociologists call the hedonic treadmill, where satisfaction remains perpetually out of reach regardless of actual consumption levels. This manufactured discontent intersects with very real structures of inequality. The concentration of wealth in increasingly smaller percentages of the population creates objective resource constraints for many, while simultaneously establishing visible models of excess that serve as standards for comparison. This combination, actual limitation alongside hypervisible abundance, creates particularly toxic conditions for scarcity consciousness, as it suggests both that vast prosperity is possible and that it remains inaccessible to most. Financial systems further entrench these patterns through mechanisms that extract wealth from those with least. Consider how banking fees disproportionately impact those with lower balances, how predatory lending targets already marginalized communities, or how the poverty tax, the higher costs paid by those without resources to buy in bulk, maintain reliable transportation, or live in areas with competitive pricing, systematically extracts resources from those who can least afford it. Perhaps most insidious is the role of debt in modern economies. Beyond its practical function in resource allocation, debt creates specific psychological conditions. The debtor experiences both temporal scarcity, future earnings already claimed, and moral obligation, the internalized imperative to repay. This combination narrows cognitive bandwidth precisely when expanded perception is most needed for creative problem-solving or opportunity recognition. The wage system itself often creates structural scarcity through the fundamental disconnection between labor and value. When compensation is tied to time rather than impact or value creation, it establishes inherent limits on prosperity regardless of contribution. This structure affects not only material resources but psychological orientation, training the mind to value its own capacities in terms of scarcity, hourly rates, rather than abundance, value created. These systemic factors create an essential context for understanding individual scarcity consciousness. Many manifestations of lack mentality represent not personal failings but rational adaptations to actual systemic constraints. The executive who cannot stop working despite financial security, the middle-class professional who feels perpetually behind despite objective comfort, the working-class family that cannot escape cyclical debt despite diligent effort, all demonstrate how economic structures create psychological conditions that persist beyond simple resource equations. Understanding these systemic dimensions serves multiple purposes. First, it redirects inappropriate self-blame by recognizing how individual psychology responds to structural conditions. Second, it helps distinguish between actual systemic constraints and internalized limitations that may no longer reflect current reality. Finally, it reveals leverage points for both individual and collective transformation. Places where altered consciousness can lead to changed circumstances despite systemic challenges. Chapter 8: Education, Media, and the Manufactured Mindset. Beyond formal economic structures, powerful cultural systems shape our beliefs about resources, worthiness, and possibility. These systems, particularly education and media, function as delivery mechanisms for scarcity programming, often operating most effectively precisely because their influence remains largely unconscious. Modern media environments surround us with approximately 4,000 to 10,000 advertising messages daily, each designed to create a specific psychological response, awareness of lack and desire for completion through consumption. The most effective advertising creates what marketers call pain points, the conscious experience of insufficiency, followed by the proposal of a specific product or service as the solution. This continuous exposure trains the mind in habitual dissatisfaction, the foundation of scarcity consciousness. News media similarly reinforces scarcity perception through crisis-oriented reporting that emphasizes threat, limitation, and conflict. While purporting to simply report reality, media selection biases systematically overrepresent danger and underrepresent positive developments, creating a distorted perception of resource availability and security. Studies consistently find that heavy news consumers significantly overestimate the prevalence of violence, scarcity, and negative trends compared to actual statistical realities. Entertainment media further entrenches scarcity narratives through storytelling that reinforces beliefs about competition, limited resources, and zero-sum outcomes. From reality television that explicitly frames success as requiring others' failure, to dramatic structures that rely on resource conflict as the primary source of tension, popular culture continuously reinforces the message that abundance for all is neither possible nor interesting. Educational systems similarly transmit scarcity programming, though often less visibly. Consider what traditional education teaches and doesn't teach about resources, value, and prosperity. Financial education in most schools remains focused on budgeting limited resources rather than creating value or building assets. The implicit message suggests that managing scarcity represents the height of financial wisdom, while the principles of wealth creation remain specialized knowledge accessible primarily to those with existing resources or connections. Educational structures themselves often reinforce scarcity thinking through competitive grading systems where success is explicitly limited, grading curves. Artificial resource constraints, limited engagement with teachers, limited opportunities for advancement, and the pervasive message that error represents failure rather than essential learning. These conditions train students in zero-sum thinking, where one person's success necessitates another's limitation. The deeper curriculum, what educators call the hidden curriculum, teaches specific beliefs about value, worth, and possibility. When educational systems reward compliance over creativity, standardization over innovation, and predefined answers over open inquiry, they systematically train students for the managed scarcity of wage labor rather than the expanded possibility of value creation. The digital environment has introduced new dimensions to this programming. Social media platforms specifically engineer comparison-based engagement, creating unprecedented opportunities for status anxiety and perceived inadequacy. The algorithmic curation of content creates filter bubbles that can either reinforce or challenge scarcity perception, while the attention economy itself treats human awareness as the scarce resource to be captured and monetized. Understanding these influences provides essential context for individual transformation. Many of our most deeply held beliefs about resources, worthiness, and possibility did not arise organically from experience but were systematically instilled through these cultural delivery systems. This recognition allows us to approach our own scarcity programming with critical distance, distinguishing between beliefs we've consciously chosen and those we've unconsciously absorbed from our information environment.